room. I've got great pleasure in introducing you to Matt Larsen-Dow, who will now take you through this wonderful webinar. The rule is that you're welcome to chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and I'll be sort of talking to Matt if there's something that's really interesting that's coming up. But Matt's basically doing a webinar, and at the end he'll be there to read through all the chats, and you're welcome to stay a bit behind for a little bit. We don't want to keep him too long, but he's going to be staying behind. Isn't that right, Matt?
Absolutely.
Over to you, mate.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen and hopefully get it right this time. Now, I'll rely on David to tell me, can you see the presentation?
I can certainly see the presentation.
Okay, good. That's good news. Let me just check that that's all going to be smooth. Good. So welcome, everyone. Great to have people from around the world joining us this evening, or it's this evening in the UK anyway. I'm the education manager for the Our Planet project at WWF. I'm based in the UK for WWF UK, but the Our Planet is a global project, and we are a global team. So I sort of represent activity across the network. And WWF is the world's leading conservation organization, active in more than 200 countries around the world. And we have a number of different education programs in the UK and around the world, focused at different issues, but all really focused around our central mission, which is achieving a future in which nature and people thrive together. So the Our Planet project has grown out of that mission, really. It is, as hopefully some of you are aware, a series that's been launched this year on Netflix, Our Planet, narrated by David Attenborough. And it is a collaboration between WWF, Netflix, and the filmmakers Silverback Films, who created Planet Earth in the past, when they were a part of the when Alistair Fothergill, who now leads Silverback Films, was with the BBC. It's a first for a number of reasons. It's the first global release of a nature documentary. Netflix has made that possible, and it's a very exciting opportunity to send messaging out, as well as the fantastic entertainment content that has a real relevance and urgency in today's world, and for that to be received all around the world at the same time and available to all. It's an 8-part series, and the first episode covers the sort of overview of how our planet works as a system and how it supports us, and how we need to keep it working properly to keep our species as well as wildlife alive. And then the next 7 episodes each focus on one biome of our planet. And I'll talk about why that's important and how that can impact on how you cover these topics in the classroom a little bit later in the webinar. It's also the first time that a conservation organization has been involved in creating a nature documentary from the beginning. A lot of the time, these documentaries like Blue Planet 2 that came out a couple of years ago, wildlife organizations, conservation organizations jump on the opportunity to share their messaging and to show people what they can do if they're interested in that environment, and if they realize that there are issues, giving them some guidance on what they can do about it. But it tends to be very reactive, whereas this time we've been able to build in the conservation messaging from the beginning and really consider this to be a series, but also a campaign with a social change agenda, if you like. But for all of that boring stuff, it is also just a really amazing series. It does have a lot of footage in it that has never been captured before of wildlife activity. The quality is so incredible that a lot of people on Twitter, after it was launched, were asking the question, is Our Planet real or is it computer generated? It just seems so majestic and so vibrant. And some of the shots just seem unreal because they brought a lot of new technology in to use drones and to use 4K camera traps to capture activity in the natural world that normally you just can't see. So there's a lot there which makes it very special and makes it very special for engaging young people in these topics. Just going to close the door behind me. It is child bedtime. So before I move on from the first slide, this is Earthrise, and every episode of Our Planet starts with an Earthrise footage taken from a shuttle orbiting the moon. And this is a very significant photograph. This is the first Earthrise photograph taken by William Anders on the Apollo 8. And it seems very significant to start with that today, because today is the 50th anniversary of the launch of Apollo 11, which was the first mission that allowed mankind to walk on the moon. So while this was taken a couple of years before, it was very much of that era when we were discovering that we could leave the boundaries of our planet. And this photograph is said to be one of the most important conservation images of all time. And the reason for that is that for the first time we could look back and see that our planet is finite, and that we are on a fragile, limited globe, and what we've got is what we're stuck with, and there's nothing else coming from anywhere else if we use it up. So I think this idea of our blue pearl floating in space is a really important image to discuss with classrooms and to discuss with students when you're thinking about the principles of sustainability, which is what Our Planet is really all about. Okay, so I'll rattle through. What I'm going to do in this webinar is give you an insight into the opportunities for you as educators to take advantage of the content that's coming out of Our Planet, and also to go into some of the principles that we have tried to follow when we've been developing the education program, in the hope that you'll also find them useful to apply in your own work. And this applies whether you're a primary school teacher, secondary school, or even into higher education or with youth groups. The first thing to note that although I've talked a lot in the introduction about the Our Planet series, it isn't just a series, it is a campaign, and it has a very ambitious target to reach 1 billion people and to make the continued degradation of the environment and loss of wildlife socially and politically unacceptable. So this global release is incredibly important, but as you can imagine, if we want to achieve this aim of changing society so that loss of wildlife is no longer acceptable and everyone's willing to make sacrifices and compromises to bring that new reality about where nature and people thrive, we need young people to be on board. So the education program is obviously, I would think it was the most important element of this project. It's definitely one of the really key elements of success for this campaign, is whether we can actually reach, engage and inspire young people to action for the planet. When I say it's not just a series, there's a huge amount of content that is available for free online. So if you can't use Netflix in the classroom, if you don't have a Netflix account yourself, don't despair, because ourplanet.com is globally accessible and contains a huge amount of video content that's made to the same quality standards by the same crew, but by the same company as the series. But it's in nice bite-sized chunks that are perfect for classrooms. So while the series episodes are about an hour long, and you are allowed to show them in school, so if you did want to have a screening and you did have the technology to do that, you can show them in a classroom, you can show them to the whole school in an assembly or in a special screening, and we have created a screening guide to help you do that. And also it's written in such a way that young people can present those screenings. So that opportunity is there, but without ever watching the series, without ever using the series in the classroom, there's a huge amount that you can use in the classroom that stands alone, and you'll find it on ourplanet.com. So first of all, there are various sections of the website filled with video content, and some of it is purely illustration, beautiful footage of the biomes, of the species that you can use when you're teaching those subjects. But there are also mini documentaries that are really fantastic bite-sized explanations of some of the concepts. So you'll see on screen there that there's one called What is Biodiversity, which is, I would say, a brilliant starting point for classes of all ages. With some younger age groups, you might need to do some extra explanation of some of the terminology. But visually, it's beautiful, and it really gets across the key points of why biodiversity is important and what we need to do in order to conserve it. But you can see there are lots of others. Under each section, for each biome, there is a section. So if you're just doing a project on forests or just jungles, you can go in and just find all the videos that relate to that and use them as case studies, use them as inspiration, or direct your students there for research. The website itself is available in 5 languages anyway, but a lot of the content has been created into, has been translated into more languages than that. And I'll explain how you can access the content in languages other than the website languages very shortly. The other section of the website that I'd like to mention is the Explorable Globe. And do just go on and have a play with this and see if it's useful to you. It's designed to present the same information really as you can find in the documentary films on ourplanet.com, but in a more guided, intuitive way. So you can actually go at your own speed through little bite-sized videos and little explanations like this. And there's visualizations of all the data that it, all the statistics that it brings up. So on this screen that I've used as the slide screenshot, you can tab between before humans and today and see the green space on the globe shrink. And while it's doing that, you can continue to drag the globe around and have a look at different parts of the world. So it's a great illustration piece for you to use on an interactive whiteboard or on a projector. It's also fantastic if you've got tablets or if you can give students some time in an IT suite. It's a really good resource to direct them for a research task. So if you give them the task of finding out and presenting on a topic, this is a really interactive way that they can explore and find the information all in one place, but within an engaging way, not just trawling through a textbook. And then there's, of course, a schools and youth section, which is where all of the education resources can be found. This is just a screenshot of one section of it. It's got quite a lot on there. The first half is aimed at the different kinds of resources that you can download, which I'll obviously be going through in this webinar. And then the second half is videos that are suitable for class, particularly suitable for classroom use. It's worth mentioning that one of the first buttons that you'll see is classroom resources. If you click on that, you actually go through to your local WWF website, or if they haven't got customized versions of the resources, you'll go through to WWF International's education page, where you'll find all of the resources that are for classroom use that are Our Planet related. But hopefully you'll also find that you have a much more useful onward journey if you find yourself in, for example, WWF Colombia's website, because that's where you're based. You'll be able to see what else they've got that can help you to explore these topics in the classroom, and everything will be there in the right language for you. The key resource that I want to highlight for you all to start with, and it's kind of a in-depth treatment of what I'm talking through in this webinar, is Our Planet, Their Future. So that's a PDF that you open up, and at the top it gives you a bit of the background, as I've done, and then it gives you details of all the other opportunities that are available so that you know what to look for. So that's a good, it's almost like an index of everything that's available for you through Our Planet. It's also got some lesson plans in there for dealing with some of the key concepts around sustainability and biodiversity. So this idea of finite resources. So it's a good entry point for that. Lessons for primary and for secondary, all in that one resource. So that's your kind of starting point if this is something you really want to crack on with. There's also an assembly pack, which can be led by a teacher or a student. It's kind of geared at being easy enough for a student to be given that task or to come up with the idea to offer that as an assembly. It's a PowerPoint presentation with video links that take you to videos that we suggest showing as part of the assembly on ourplanet.com. And it goes through the key concepts of our planet, the key concepts and issues that are threatening biodiversity, and then ends with a really strong call to action. And it can, of course, be adapted so that you can turn it into something which really fits with your audience and plays to the strengths of or the interests of your school or any projects that they're currently working on.
Can I pause you?
Of course you can, David.
I've got a question. Sounds great. Last month they were still working on the resources for the UK. Are they now all available?
Yes, all the UK resources are available. So we have all of the resources on ourplanet.com that you link through to are in English, unless you're moving to a WWF site for the translated. But the UK has created additional versions. Oh, hang on, sorry. Everything's English language. So I think what's being created in the UK are some PowerPoints that will just make the lessons easier to deliver. But it is the same content as the core resources, which are available, and they're available obviously in English and also in other languages. So I think what I mentioned in the last month's webinar was that some additional work was being done on the UK resources. That is still underway. I think it's going to be, I think they're going to be launched in September. But everything that's already there is already great to use in UK classrooms. It's just that I think a little bit of extra work to kind of create presentations that you can just walk through in the classroom is still being done by our UK team.
Thanks for that, mate.
So why are we focusing so much on young people and education with this project? I sort of touched on it earlier, but I wanted to just share this quote from David Attenborough and to dive into it a little bit. So I've got it as audio, but it doesn't always play very well on Skype, so I'll just read it. Young people are the future of our planet. We must equip them with the information, insight, and practical skills to understand the importance of biodiversity, both intrinsically and for the survival of humanity. Educators have a key role to play in preparing young people for the challenges that lie ahead. There can be no greater legacy than giving young people the tools they need to save our planet. So inspiring words, and obviously highlights the importance of us as educators in making sure that the conversation that's happening at the moment around the future of our planet really leads to change that is sustained for generations to come. And that really does rely on it being embedded in education and really being understood by the young people who are growing up into this world. His words of understanding the importance of biodiversity, both intrinsically and for the survival of humanity, I also think is really important, because on one side, it is because we do need young people to understand these concepts so that they can play the role of stewards of the natural world in the years to come. So that's for the survival of humanity. But also it's really important that they understand it intrinsically, because it's part of life. And it's something which is really valuable to anybody that knows, because they've got their own connection with nature. But also understanding the situation that we're in and the state of biodiversity at the moment. If young people are not equipped to understand that, they will not be equipped to deal with the challenges that lie ahead. Because the world is going to have to change in order to protect and restore nature. We hope that we're doing it in time, but regardless of how successful we are, those efforts will be made, and it will affect every aspect of life on the planet for us. So that means that young people can either go into that with their eyes closed because they haven't been fully educated in why these issues are important and why these changes are important and what impacts are currently being felt in the natural world from human activity. Or they can go in equipped with that information and with that understanding, and they can take that knowledge into their own lives. And that could affect their career choices, and it could affect their lifestyle choices, and it can mean they can make positive decisions that are best for them economically, ethically and for their own happiness. So some of you will hopefully already know the WWF brings out something called the Living Planet Report every 2 years. The one in 2018 was a little bit different from any that came before, and it forms the basis of the science behind our planet. So the Living Planet Report always talks about the state of biodiversity on the planet. And historically, it has always shown the same thing, which is we are declining since the last one. So it's been a steady decline, even since the SDGs, sorry, the Sustainable Development Goals were established that were meant to slow that decline and hopefully prevent it from continuing. So in 2018, as well as showing that we are still declining, WWF, working with its partners on the Living Planet Report, including ZSL, decided that we needed to start extending that narrative. We needed to start talking not only about the state of the planet, but the actions that are needed. So we started to talk about the need and the possibility of bending the curve, which means stopping this decline and then also starting to bring nature back so that we have more of it than we currently do. So as this is a really, really important message that carries through the Our Planet series, because although it does show a lot of human impact on the natural world, it also constantly reinforces the fact that change is possible and that we can change things for the better if we try. And so the Living Planet Report gives a little bit of an insight into the timeline that we need to do that within, and also the kinds of areas that we need to change in society to be able to bring about the change that's needed. So it doesn't go into all the detail on each issue that the Our Planet series and website does, and it's obviously not filled with that beautiful visual content, but it's all there, and it's got this great science story behind it. So we created a youth version of that, and it's called Reporting on Our Living Planet. And it's sort of like the foundation resource for our planet, and it is mentioned in that Our Planet, Their Future resource that I mentioned. So you can find that by the website as well, or by searching it online and getting it from the WWF International or WWF UK websites. And it comes with an education pack, so a PowerPoint presentation, some visual resources, activities, lesson plans, and all sorts. The lesson plans are geared towards UK curriculum, and they're sort of ready to go for teachers in the UK, but they're great resources to adapt or to just use as is in any country, although you won't necessarily benefit from the same curriculum links that we've drawn there. So I mentioned already, but Our Planet, one of the key things I think to mention when it comes to using this content with young people is that there is a message of hope behind the series. It isn't just doom and gloom. When it was launched, there was a lot of activity on social media. People were shocked because they're not used to seeing negative imagery of the natural world, in the sense that you're normally shown everything working fine and everything beautiful. And Blue Planet 2 started to introduce the idea that actually you should show some of the bad things that are happening as a result of human activity. And Our Planet goes a lot stronger and embeds that in every biome that it talks about. It talks about what humans are doing that are having an impact on it. So people were a bit shocked. It doesn't detract from how beautiful and incredible the nature footage is, but it does mean that it is a call to action. However, the conclusion from every episode is that there are things that we can change, and we can change them in time to bring nature back from the brink. So it's really emphasizing that if we do make the change that we know is needed, then we can save the planet. And I think that's really, really important when working with young people, because at the moment, as we've seen with the climate strikes movement and Extinction Rebellion, there is a lot of fear out there and a lot of anger at the fact that young people are having to deal with this crisis, which they didn't create. And there's a danger that it just becomes shouting for action and shouting with anger at the fact that they're having to act themselves, but actually not necessarily knowing what they do need to do or what changes they need to call for. So we want them to care, but we don't want them to despair. And I think the Our Planet content really helps to do that. It's a bit of an antidote to some of the bleak press that they're very likely to see, and a lot of the campaigning social media posts that they might see that basically just show how terrible everything is, but don't give a path for positive change. And the path for positive change is what we really need young people to embrace and to lead the way on. So with that in mind, even the Living Planet report for youth, which came out a year before Our Planet, starts to bring in this idea that we need to link environmental literacy with political literacy, because conservation organisations in the past have often focused on, particularly in their education content, have focused on what we can do in our own lives. And it is a good way to get people to think about the issues and for them to connect it to their own reality. But they're not necessarily the changes that will actually bring about the scale of change that's needed to actually save the planet. So this diagram is taken from that Living Planet report, and you can see it has individual actions there, and they are important, and we should think about what we can do. But we shouldn't put pressure on individuals and say, you know, if we're continuing to damage the planet, it's because you're not doing enough. Because actually what's needed is the governments and the big businesses need to make the really big changes that lead to international agreements and global change. And individual actions work towards that end because they show that people care, they show that this is something people are interested in, but we also need to kind of push those national governments, we need to push those big businesses to listen to us when we're saying that that's important to us. And young people, that's something which has not necessarily been introduced to them early enough, particularly because you know, they might not yet have a vote. But in fact, they do still have a role to play. And we've seen with the climate change strikes, the school climate strikes, that actually politicians do listen when young people come out in force. They look bad if they don't. And it is an important audience for them because it's the voters of tomorrow, and they will have parents. And so these things mean that actually young people do have power, and they should be taught in school how they can use that and what that actually looks like in practice. We will be bringing out some more resources as this year goes on, that are focused on this sort of political change agenda. So actually making sure that young people understand what's happening in the political arena and how that affects their future and the future of the planet. And in particular, we'll be focusing on what WWF is currently calling the New Deal for Nature. It might end up being called something a bit different, but this idea of key changes that are made in 2020, which will be 10 years to the milestone of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. And there's a number of really important high-level international summits that will take place in 2020. And each of them, we've identified 5 as being really key. Each of them could bring about a significant agreement or a significant commitment that if it was then followed through, if all 5 happened, the high 5 for nature, we're calling it, if all 5 happened, then actually we could bend the curve, we could bring the planet back from the brink. And obviously that's a really, really exciting and important message, because otherwise, you know, there is this danger of people despairing or thinking that it's not even worth doing anything, because how can we actually reverse the current situation? But we believe it is possible, and it's possible in the very short term if we can start the path now. So we want young people to understand what those are, because although they won't be the ones voting, they have a voice that their national governments and their local MPs or decision makers who feed into national government, they will listen to them, and it is important that they know that young people understand what positive change looks like and are calling for it. So quick walk through some of the concepts that our planet deals with, and which I think are really useful concepts to introduce in the classroom. So the first is the concept of the Anthropocene, which is this idea of a new geological era that we are now in, where the state of the planet and the future of all things living on it is all connected to what humans do. We are the biggest impact on the planet, for better or worse. And so the sort of concept of this, it's only a theory. It doesn't have complete scientific consensus, but as a concept, it's quite widely talked about. It's a really useful for classroom discussion and for students to understand when they hear about it. It has a nice link in with language, with etymology, because you can break it down into the Greek roots of anthro, for humans, and this idea that it fits with previous geological eras. So you can understand what makes an epoch, what makes a geological epoch different from another one, and does the Anthropocene qualify because of the amount the amount of impact that we're having on the way that land is used, on the climate, on the atmosphere, and on even things like nuclear explosions and experiments in the past that have led to something that you can actually see in the geological era, geological record. So there's a lot of concepts there that make it quite an interesting topic for discussion and exploration. But it can be quite a positive term, because although it's seen instinctively as a negative one, because it's about the impact that humans are having on nature, it is also a reminder that we are the guiding force for the planet, and we can bring about change if we all act in the right way, because we have the power, we have the scientific knowledge, and we have the technology, we have huge population, so that changing behaviours really do have an impact on the planet, and that's something which actually means that it is worth us looking at what we can change and trying to do so. The other concept that's obviously very important to this is biodiversity, and everyone at the moment is becoming increasingly aware of what climate change is and what climate change means, but biodiversity is still not brilliantly understood across society, and it's a very, very important term, and because we needed to get that billion people on board if we're going to reach our target for our planet, we did wonder whether it was too sciencey a term, whether it was too jargony, and whether we should just talk about nature and wildlife. But actually, biodiversity is a very specific term, and it's a very important term. And we decided to use it in the series and to use it in the educational materials for a number of reasons. First of all, it is in the curriculum, so it is obviously in the science curriculum in most countries. So it is something which you can bring into the classroom, and it's not too much of a barrier. But secondly, it has these really specific connotations that are very important. And I mentioned the What is Biodiversity film that's voiced by David Attenborough on ourplanet.com. I really do recommend that as a starting point if you cover this in the classroom, because it's a really clear description of what biodiversity means. And it is, of course, the diversity of life and habitats and living systems. And the more diverse it is, the healthier it is, the more resilient it is. And it's that diversity that ensures that it can deliver all the things which we rely on nature for, such as clean air to breathe, clean water, food, medicines, and so on, and protection from diseases and flooding and so on. So understanding that concept is really important. And I think the other reason why it's two reasons why it's a really important term. One is that it's used, it is the term that's used in the political arena. So if we want to ensure that people understand these concepts and how they relate to what they should actually be calling for from their decision makers, then they need to know the right terminology. But secondly, it doesn't exclude humans. Biodiversity is all variety of life, whether that's humans, tigers, pets, fish in the sea, fish in farms. It's all life on the planet, and it just is a scale of how diverse or not it is in a different habitat. And that's really important, so that there's an understanding that it's all connected, including humans, and we're not separate from it. We're affected by it, we're dependent on it, and so are other things dependent on what we do or don't do. And then, of course, because the series episodes are split up into the different biomes of our planet, it's really important for students to understand what a biome is, which is a specific geography with its own set of conditions and own set of organisms that thrive in those conditions. Because the different biomes of our planet all support each other. They are like the organs of a body. And although in the series they might not be split into the same biomes as you might instinctively cover in the classroom. For example, we don't have a mountains episode. We have 2 oceans episodes. We have coastal seas and high seas. Those kinds of designations have been put in place because it ensures that we can look at the different qualities that different environments on our planet have, and how one supports the other, and then that supports another, and how actually we need to save all parts of our planet so that it can work as a living system, and not just worry about one at a time. If we save the jungles, but we're not helping to prevent the melting of the ice caps, then of course climate change will mean that ultimately we can't save the jungles anyway, so our work will have been for nothing. It's about this whole system being important as an integrated system. So I won't go into detail on this, but in the series it always picks up on a kind of quality that is illustrated by a particular biome that the planet needs, and it needs all of these qualities to be working for it to really work as a proper system. And that's a really good way to understand the connections between different environments, and not just think about a particular topic. So I've mentioned the education downloads. So we have one primary school resource for every biome, and of course that's Our Planet Their Future introductory resource. They all follow the same format, which is really easy to get your head around and quite versatile. So it starts with a brief that's been written for the sort of 7 to 11 age group, but it's definitely appropriate for older ages, and can be drawn on for your own lessons with younger ages. So it's the key importance of a biome, some interesting wildlife facts, and to give you a sense of what lives there and why it thrives there and why it's important within the system. Then the problems that are being caused by human activity, and then finally what needs to change to protect this biome in the future. So it's all quite accessible. There's a lovely big illustration for each one, which these thumbnails are drawn from, which is always split into 2 halves. So one half shows the ecosystem declining with all the problems that are being caused by human activity and evidence. And then on the other side, you see a thriving version of the ecosystem where those problems are dealt with, and everything's working as it should. So you can understand how it works when it's working properly, and what that looks like. Those can be used in isolation. They're provided in the accompanying teacher packs, so that you can use those visual resources to prompt class discussions. They don't have the annotations in the visual resources, so you can kind of get them to have their own discussions, do their own annotations, and do lots of activities around those illustrations as well. So it's not just about the video resources on the website. We've tried to create things that are particularly useful for students to actually explore and discuss, where all of those topics can be drawn out of one prompt image. And I really wanted to explain about one of our resources that's targeted at a slightly older age group, that sort of 11 to 14-year-olds. In fact, it could definitely go older than that, so 11 to 18-year-olds really. But could, as with the other ones, but the other way, it could be adapted to work with younger age groups as well. And this is a workshop toolkit called Our Planet's Future. And the idea is that you role play with a group of young people, anything from 8 young people all the way up to 40. And with that many young people, you split into different roles, and they role play an international summit to define the future of our planet. So some young people take on the role of world leaders, and the rest as environmental experts. And if you really want to make it more complex and do it over a longer time period or over several lessons, you can bring in spokespeople for business or experts in fossil fuel industry and things like that, and actually have some really interesting discussions of the different priorities that different people bring to the table. In its very simplest form, you can run it as a 2-hour workshop, but even then you can split it up and do it in 2 or even 4 different sessions, because there's different tasks at different stages. So the groups of young people do a bit of research in their groups to come up with their case, come up with their kind of ideas of what they want to call for and what they want to change, based on what they're meant to be looking at specifically. Then there's presentations from all of them, which you can obviously split over several lessons if you want to do this as a longer term process. And then when all of the evidence has been heard, the world leaders sort of think about what they feel is the right plan, and what they will change and what they will decide to do, and how they'll spend their budget. And then there's a roundtable debate where they can put this to the experts can feedback, they can see if they want to make any changes. And it's really a chance for all of the environmental experts who have each researched a different biome to make their case for the biome that they're championing, to really make sure that the one big change or the 2 big changes that they think are absolutely vital to the future of our planet are understood by the world leaders and acted on. And of course, that with a limited budget, it might be that they're competing, if you like, with some of the other environmental experts, because the world leaders might not be able to fund all the ideas. So between all of the young people, they have to come up with some way of trying to define a sustainable future through their actions and through their spend that will work for everybody. So there's practice for each of the different roles to give them a bit of a briefing and to guide their discussions and their planning. There's some additional resources such as these fictional case studies, which the world leaders can take on if they want to, or if you want them to, or they can represent real countries, or they can just be generic world leaders with a budget, and they just have the role of the decision makers and the power, but they don't necessarily need to do any research into particular issues that might affect a particular country. And then the environmental experts likewise are given a briefing. They're given those there's a dossier on each of the biomes, which is basically adapted from the primary resources, that gives them the background that they need to prepare a case for their particular biome of focus. And this is an area where you can bring it into a number of different subjects. So we haven't curriculum linked this, again, because it's a global resource, but the topics they're covering are science and geography, but then they're using debating skills, there's citizenship, there's political literacy, and there's presentation skills in terms of the technology that they might use. They can prepare PowerPoints, they can prepare research papers. So there's a huge amount that you can do with this as the scaffold that can strengthen a lot of different learning objectives. But ultimately, through the process, which is really fun and engaging because it's all talking and researching and arguing, they actually gain a very nuanced understanding of a lot of complex issues and how they interconnect. And then, of course, also the complications of actually bringing about change when there's all these different competing demands. So I really recommend that. We've just brought out a video, which will be going up on the site shortly, that explains in a nutshell how this workshop works, and I'll post the link to it as a bit of a preview for you. It's not live yet in the public eye, but I'll share it in the chat at the end of this webinar. if you're interested in that, because the packs, I think it's quite clearly laid out, but it's obviously quite long because it's got all of these different briefing packs in. And if you really want to just get a sense in 3 minutes of whether it's for you and whether it would work with your young people, then hopefully the video will give that to you. There's also, I mentioned that there are some classroom videos on the Schools and Youth page of ourplanet.com. They're built into the Our Planet's Future Summit as well, so that before the experts for the Cs speak, you show one of these videos, and before the grasslands experts, you show the grasslands video. And these little videos are really fantastic as just nice ways to break it up and to make it visually and audio interesting. It's footage from the series, so it's really beautiful stuff, really quick fire montages, and these are all about 1.5 minutes long, so they can just be used to break up a session and to just give a bit of a prompt and a bit of a breather, but also you'll find in the Our Planet's Their Future resource some guidance on how you can use these and any other videos to generate really useful and constructive class discussion. So I think that's a really useful reference point if you are going to use the content on the website at all, but particularly these videos, because they don't have any voiceover, they don't have any subtitles. It's all just about what they see on screen, the reaction that they have, and then how you get them to feedback and discuss or reflect on what they've seen. But in the Our Planet's Future Summit, they're just really good ways to break up the presentations and to give something exciting and snazzy for people to watch. So the last resource I want to go into any detail on is our citizen science program, which is Our Planet Lab, which was only launched last month. And this is a toolkit and a series of tools that are all about walking away from the screen. So not using ourplanet.com, not using Netflix, but actually looking at what biodiversity looks like around you and in your daily life. And for schools and youth groups, what we're really hoping is that this will become a real group exploration where they study and explore the wonderful variety of nature that they have on their doorstep, grow to understand it better, but then also start to take action to protect and restore biodiversity in their local area, and then see the impact of their actions, which is both a great learning experience, but also a really great lesson in having agency and actually being able to have an impact and to bring about positive change. So the toolkit's available on that ourplanet.com schools and youth page, and it talks you through 3 stages of the project. And then there's various different ways that you can run each stage for different age groups and with different time commitments. But the first one is to seek, and seek means just going out and finding out actually what's there. So running bio blitzes, which is where everyone goes out and explores in one area and tries to find and record as many different wildlife species as they can find. So you get a real snapshot of how biodiverse that area is. So whether you're using a school ground or a local park or a nature reserve, then you really get a picture of, at that time of year, how much wildlife there is. And what's always great about this is if you run this for like an hour or even just half an hour, it is amazing how many organisms your students will find in an area that really doesn't seem like it's very wild. And that's in itself a fantastic learning, because it gives them this sense that biodiversity is all around them, and this is a living planet, and they're tuned in to all of the sort of human behaviors and buildings and all the things that they're actually interacting with on a daily basis. And of course, they'll find things which they've never seen before, even though that they walk past that area every day. And that can be really exciting and inspiring. We've created an app to support this called Seek by iNaturalist, and that's out now, and it's a free app, and it's available on Android or Apple. It works on devices or smartphones, And this is a really, really good tool for this process in the Our Planet Lab session. It's not a requirement. You don't have to use this technology to enhance the project. We've got offline nature recording forms as part of the toolkit and suggestions for other things that you can use. But what's great about it is that it helps you to identify in real time what wildlife you're finding. So as you can see from the image on screen, this is using the app on an iPhone. It's scanned over this plant and it's come up with the species before you've even taken a picture. And that works really well with young people because the feedback is instant. They can just go and it's like Shazam for nature, if you know that, Shazam for identifying tunes that are playing over a speaker that isn't yours. You can just hold your phone up and let it listen for a bit, and it'll tell you what song it is. This does that, but you just scan over a bug or a bird or a plant or a flower, and it will come up with hopefully the full species. But the way it works, you'll see those 7 dots along the top there underneath the species name. They work because there are different levels of classification that the app will work its way down through. So if it doesn't have very much information, if you're a bit far away or you haven't focused yet, or if you're just looking at the stalk but not the leaf, not the flower, anything distinctive about the organism, it will be able to tell you what kingdom, maybe what phylum it's in, but it won't be able to tell you any more detail than that. But as you give it more and more information, it will be able to tell you more and more about it. And if it has everything it needs to be able to see how that organism is different from any other, then it can tell you what species it is. And that's a really great soft learning experience for young people, because the idea of taxonomy is actually quite complex, and often it's difficult to convey in an interesting way. But this is just a very intuitive tool. But just by using the app, they start to understand what classification literally means, and how you become more and more specific to an organism the further you get down that sort of tree of taxonomy. So I really recommend using Seek if you can, but don't feel that the Our Planet Lab resource is not applicable to you if you can't use that technology in the classroom, because it is the process of just going out and finding what you've got there is something that's always been possible, and you can use reference books and you can use internet research and so on. The resource that accompanies the app, which is part of the toolkit for Our Planet Lab, actually gives some guidance specifically for educators that want to go out and run bioblitzes as to what different technologies or non-technologies they can use. And there's different models depending on what's possible and what you feel will work with your young people. So the second stage of the Our Planet Lab program is to connect, and that means first of all understanding the connections within the ecosystem that you're exploring. So when you've collected that data, when you've got an idea of what organisms thrive and what's not there that you might have expected to find, you can start to think about how they're connected to each other, how the habitats that you've got in your school ground connect to what species are actually there, and how what's next door, if you've got a woodland next door, if you've got a motorway next door, how that is impacting on what you're finding in the school ground. It also is the point in the project where you can connect to other schools. And on our Planet Live Skype in the Classroom page, which I'll just mention again at the end, there's a collaboration that you can join. So if you're interested in running this project with your students or your youth group, please do join the collaboration, and we can link you up with another school that wants to do the same, either a local school if that's what you want, or a school in your country, or a school abroad. And that allows the young people to see how biodiversity looks different depending on the environment that you're in, which is a really important learning, and also to just share their findings, which obviously makes it extra exciting, with another group of young people, and to see what other young people are finding in a very different context. That's a really great, exciting way to draw those connections. And then finally, the last stage of the project is to take that information, take those conclusions, and to decide what you can do to improve biodiversity. What changes can you make to the way people use the land, or what's there, whether you can dig a pond or plant some wildflowers. And then, of course, by continuing to monitor biodiversity, you can see the impact of your actions, which again is really inspiring and motivating, as well as being a great learning point. So I mentioned Our Planet Live, so hopefully you already know about it since you're on this webinar, so I won't go into much detail, but there's loads of great opportunities there. We are adding to it every month, so if you have been a bit frustrated because you've gone on and everything that you wanted to do is already booked up, or the speakers are up to capacity and they're not responding, please do continue to go back. We'll be adding more as the year goes on. And if you're interested in offering a lesson that you feel could be of interest to classrooms anywhere else in the world, that would dive deep into any of the issues connected to our planet, species, biomes, sustainability, or solutions, then please do get in touch with me, because we'd love to increase the diversity of opportunities on there. And you'll also find the Our Planet Lab collaboration on there, and we'll hopefully be adding at least another collaboration on there before the end of the year. And a quick plug before I finish, we have a free CPD course on TES platform. So if you search TES, TES, and WWF, and free course or ESD course or whatever it might be, you'll come up with this. It's free to register. It's about 8 hours long, and you can do it in your own time through the modules. And it's a really good introduction to the principles of sustainability, explaining the concepts and embedding the principles in the classroom and in the school wider. So that brings me to my last slide. So it was just to leave you with a few conclusions, which hopefully have sort of each been mentioned in their own right. But for me, the way that Our Planet can help you cover these topics in the classroom, but also the way we should be covering the topics around sustainability and environment in the classrooms, it all comes down to connections. Environmental to political, because that's how this can actually be education that leads to change. Local to the global, so that understanding that they're not just global issues, they're also relevant and local, but also the things that you see around you and the behaviors that you the things that you do are actually part of global issues. Connecting theory to experience by getting them out, getting their hands dirty and letting them see what biodiversity looks like in their local area. And then understanding the connections between the biomes and between the species in the biomes and between human life and nature, that they're not actually separate, they are intrinsically linked. I think those are the really important takeaways that Our Planet can really help you cover, because it's all there, all to the same quality, and browsable through that explorable globe and through these different resources and the summit workshop. And I think that's incredibly important to cover those. So I always leave it with this. I think that really we should have in the back of our mind that we should cover not just one topic, not just one species or biome, but the whole planet. We should think about the whole school and not just a particular lesson or just academic teaching, but actually about what you see in terms of how sustainability can be acted on in the way a school is run. And we should look at a whole person and not just their mind, but also think about what these issues mean for somebody, like in their life outside school, in the way that makes them feel, and their future aspirations as a person, not just as a student. So that brings an end to the webinar. So I would be delighted to answer any questions that you have on the chat, or if it's more complex than that, we can connect on a call one-to-one. My email address is also on the slide that we're finishing on here, so please do feel free to drop me an email with any ideas you have. What I'd really love is if you don't have a question, I'd still love it if you could drop a comment into the chat to just say if there's any of the different resources or ideas or topics that I've talked about today that you think you are going to take away and use. That would be really good for me to know, and really interesting feedback. But of course, also if there's anything that you think you see a problem with. I'd also love to have that kind of feedback as well, because we're still working on more resources. We can still plug gaps. We can still provide additional things that are needed for educators to really make the most of this content. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Just to I'm doing a bit squeaky. Just to confirm that you're going to put some resources on now on the chat. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll send a link to the Our Planet Summit film that I mentioned particularly, and if I think of anything else that I mentioned, I'll stick that on as well.
Well, as I said, we're going to terminate the webinar, but you're very welcome to stay for a little bit and engage in some chat with Matt, who's going to stay for a few minutes. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and thanks, Matt, from the WWF. It was it's some fantastic stuff. So really, thank you for that, Matt.
Thank you very much. Thanks, David.
Take care, guys.